So tonight we've got Bob Davis to give us our weekly news update, and following that we have Professor Rachel Aldred, who's going to talk, and Clare Rogers, who are both going to talk about low traffic neighbourhoods. So some research and some campaigning. So Bob, I'll hand over to you.
Okay, so thanks, Sally. Righty ho, wait a minute. Sorry, share screen. Still got the host disabled participant screen sharing.
How's that, Bob?
Let's have a look. Oh, that's better. Yep. Good. Righty-ho. Okay. Transport in the time of COVID-19 updated 14th of June. So don't forget our website here, and you can send me specific things by Monday evening, please, to this address. Right, so let's just whip through the last week. I'm still putting up this pictures of Kiev because it really is so important, and it is linked to greenhouse gas emissions, fossil fuels, and it's just generally important. And don't forget, you can send bikes to Ukraine by going to this Danish website. Okay, so this last week, we've been getting a lot of stuff about fuel prices, skyrocketing, motorists have been hammered, crushed, ripped to pieces, etc., etc. My personal view is, why doesn't somebody talk about how driving should be made more inconvenient? My view is that petrol and diesel prices do need to go up. There's a lot of stuff about how people will have to choose to eat rather than driving. And I point out that the poorest are unlikely to be driving anyway. And you can look at the various bits of information which we've put up in the past on that. Effectively what we're doing is adding on to money which has already been given through cancelling the fuel duty tax accelerator since Cameron came to power, and that amounts to about 115 billion pounds. I'm saying if we want to give people money, rather than giving motorists across the board with the wealthiest doing best out of it, why not pay them something else, like putting up benefits or paying their rents or subsidizing food or whatever. And there's a lot of stuff. I mean, the AA guy he tries to greenwash a lot, and he talked about how it's good that people are giving up driving for short distances, supposedly to walk and cycle. He tries to get the cyclist vote. And then he says, oh, but what about people in rural areas? And, we should have our answers ready for this. And it would be nice if some of the various green lobbying charities had people out there talking about why we will need to increase petrol and diesel prices, admittedly not suddenly or without any notice. But my tentative personal suggestion is that green people tend to be nice and friendly and pleasant people, and they're not prepared to actually say, look, some negative stuff has to happen. It's not just about the good alternatives, it's about stuff which is wrong. And yeah, some people are going to suffer from the things that we need to do. That's my view. And this was seen in Bristol on petrol pumps. This is from Specialized. I don't know who actually put these things on the pump saying, why don't you ride a bike instead? But it's interesting. Any information welcome. Right, now this has been done, original work was done by my colleague, Professor Adrian Davis. It's a new report from the people in Scotland, walking and cycling, latest evidence to support policy making and practice. So do have a good look through that. It's reported here, the link is the North Edinburgh News, because his work is quite embedded with the Scottish Greens and others in the Scottish Parliament, as I understand it. Here's one table I picked out. It's the fatality rates of walking and cycling. So you look at the fatality rate, deaths per 100 million kilometers, which is what you always need to look at road traffic collision casualties as against the average amount of walking or cycling. So this shows that if you have societies that genuinely facilitate cycling and walking, you get low fatality rates per 100 million kilometers. And you can either look at that as being safety in numbers, or that you have numbers in safety. Two different and indeed opposing points of view, but they can come together. Either way, you do it like the Danes do it, and you get lower walking and cycling deaths per 100 million kilometers walked and cycled. Yeah, it's a bit of a messy graph actually, because the green should be cycling and the green should be outside the flag, but you can't actually see it. All you can see is it looks a bit pink, whereas the blue for walking is more obvious. Right, his report, a survey done by Cycling UK. 43% of young people in Britain said they expect their transport costs to rise and are considering changing their method of travel. Goody, so let's support active travel. There's still referencing for Traffic Management Act 2004, published on 31st of May. If anybody's read through that and wants to tell me anything, please do. Here's from Mark Strong, more on Active Travel Fund Tranche 3. The following authorities didn't get anything. We don't know if they submitted anything. They're mainly unitary authorities, but not totally. Lancashire, Leicestershire, Worcestershire involved. Didn't get anything. We don't know if they submitted bids. And those that got funding, here's a table. I don't know what MH actually means. This is the final allocation.
Mini Holland. They got
Mini Holland.
Mini Holland
Beg your pardon.
feasibility study.
Yeah, beg your pardon. So excluding funding for Mini Hollands, feasibility studies, not actual Mini Hollands. You've got Northeast Joint Traffic, I don't know what that is, Liverpool City Region Combined Authority, up to 11.6 million, and it goes down with the funding. So Buckinghamshire's down on a rather pathetic £45,000. Here are the levels, this lot have done kind of quite well. Don't know the specific schemes, but anyway, those are those who got funding. Thanks for that from Mark. Okay, the reading list, new things. I mentioned last week something on car tires producing more particle pollution than exhausts. But Wookie pointed out something from these people, Transport Evolved, which says that's not actually true. And you can see why on that YouTube. Centre for London, Street Shift, the future of low traffic neighbourhoods. I don't know if Rachel's going to be mentioning that. It does focus on London, but it's obviously relevant to everybody who's interested in low traffic neighbourhoods, which includes everybody who's online now. This is a major consultation for people in London. Lovely video there I mentioned last week, features Chris Boardman. the pavements report, and this article by Simon Cooper on the cheap green low-tech solution for the world's mega cities, which is of course the bicycle. Okay, do have a look at the Transport and Health Integrated Research Network. It's called Think. Go to that link if you're an academic and you're interested in transport and health. And there's a webinar registration. This is about the new active travel demonstrator tool available in IRAP's online analysis tools. I'm not a big fan of IRAP, I should say, but they are trying to do alternative ways of assessing danger and risk. So take a look at what they're doing, register for that webinar. Here's a consultation for those of you in Birmingham. That's new, the rest of it we've talked about before. Straight Line Crazy, if you're in London, do try and get to that. I went to see that with Sylvia Gaudreau and Lucy Master and Tausig last week, and it was great. There is a consultation coming up on the service implementation plan for transport for the Southeast. I'll get a link to you for that next week. Right, in the UK, I mentioned this last week, the anti-disabled people and everybody else, barriers. Colchester cycling campaign, so this is one of 81 barriers identified in Colchester. Birmingham, I mentioned the planning success for the car-free couple about getting their cycle shed container parking facility on their property. Go to the article there. Or if you've got a specific question, go to Shivaji Shiva, or on general things to do with the planning, go to Christopher Allingham Illustrated. Greater Manchester, this has been pointed out to me. The B network has got 100 kilometres of walking and cycling routes. The original vision was 1,800 kilometres. I mentioned the Southborough School Street last week, and I've been informed this is one of only 2 in the whole of Kent. Right, in London, I mentioned the bolt-on cycle stands last week. That's in Mallet Street. It's now been sorted, and they are now properly cemented in, concreted in. And I also had a query last week about the settlement letters with regard to Active Travel Fund Tranche 3. When I announced this nationally, they said that letters have been sent to Transport for London, but these were for March. I don't know if there's any news on that. There's a new cycling champion with the council who seems to be saying the right kind of thing. In Westminster, Transport for London, unfortunately, they are due to remove the light segregated cycle lanes on Euston Road, which went in during the first lockdown, apparently because there's restrictions on bus times. I don't know any more about it than that. I showed this graphic about the stunt being done, or was supposedly to have been done just near Hammersmith Bridge in West London to show how much space cars take up. And I referred to the originals that were done in the 70s. And I was sent information about some that had been done more recently elsewhere by Wookie again. This was in Latvia. And it was 7 years ago, and you can see the links there. That's the emissions graphic I showed you last week. It's quite a useful one. And this is a graphic which has been doing the rounds. Carriage widths in the 1840s, car widths, Golf Mark I in 1980. And in 2022, the width of Range Rovers. And you can see what's happened there. There's an interesting graphic. And finally, I was looking at an old copy of Cycling Weekly, and No, that's not finally. Yeah, here's another one. This is a Mini Cooper S. In 73, when they suspected their vehicle's fuel was in short supply, they produced a vehicle like that. And in 2019, when they knew their vehicle's fuel was overheating the pallet when it was burned, they produced a vehicle like this. So the finally is what I saw when I looked at an old copy of Cycling Magazine, now Cycling Weekly. The All Change to Bikes campaign, started by the British Cycling Bureau, takes another step forward on April 6, when the London Borough of Camden, the local Friends of the Earth enthusiasts, stage a bike-in. The idea is to persuade local authorities to provide more facilities for cycles with special cycleways and parking facilities, says the Camden Friends of the Earth spokesman. And that was in March the 16th, 1974, 48 years ago. Right. Well, things have actually moved forward a bit in Camden. I will say that for Camden. Gives you an idea of historical context. And that is it.
Thanks, Bob. Very comprehensive as always. And I can see there's a couple of hands up already. Simon, have you got a question or a comment?
Comment on Euston Road, and in part to answer Ruth's comment about why mode shift isn't the target for TfL, etc. So short answer is TfL have got loads of data showing that bus journey times is basically directly correlated or inversely correlated to ridership and therefore their revenue. So bus journey times get longer, fewer people ride buses, TfL gets less money. Given TfL is being bailed out by DfT in a really curmudgeonly way routinely at the moment, then it's understandable. But we have raised major issues over the removal of the Euston Road track regardless, because it basically breaks their climate commitments and their Vision Zero commitments. So it's quite a serious issue. There's a blog up, there's a big tweet thread from London Cycling Campaign today, but basically there's a lot of unanswered questions on this one, on why collisions on a really seriously horrific road do not appear to count when it comes to bus journey times. So yeah, there we are.
Yeah, thanks, Simon. Mark, do you have a point or a... Mark? He's watching the...
Yeah, I was just trying to unmute. Yes, so just on that last excerpt from Bob, that's actually the foundation of LCC, because LCC was founded by All Change to Bikes Westminster, and which I didn't know where All Change to Bikes came from. So now I know what that campaign was, and Kensington Chelsea Friends of the Earth, which is quite ironic given the history of cycle campaigning in London. But they were the two organisations, I think, that in 1977 founded them. And we have a member from All Change to Bikes Westminster still living in, well, Hove, Shoreham actually, Les Robinson. So if anyone ever wants to talk to him, he must be in his early 80s now, about the foundation of LCC, he is still around and able to talk to people about that. I think Laura Laker is writing a book on the history of cycle campaigning. So
fantastic. That sounds great. Thank you. I can see Jean and George have a hand up. Who wants to speak?
It's just a follow-up on Simon's comments about Euston Road, that we're not lying down. Neither is Camden cyclists aren't lying down, nor are Camden councillors. Quite a few of them are very angry, and there is a prospect of some action, maybe even extending to legal action to do something about it. That's as much as I can say at the moment, really. Except that Simon mentioned that TfL basing the argument on bus passenger numbers. We have asked questions and have not received any answers whatsoever from TfL about the numbers before and after, how it's changed, what their income from the buses is, and so on. None of that. So they're just ignoring the needs of people other than cyclists, other than bus riders and drivers.
Thanks. Stephen Edwards, you've got your hand up.
Yes. Can I say something completely different? I was lying down yesterday. I'm in Camden Cyclist anyway, as Jean and George know. But I was with my other group, Extinction Rebellion, Roads Rebellion, and we just to say that we had a die-in at Toyota's London showroom. It was fairly small, but it was just a shot across the bows, and just to let people know, because people assume that Toyota are quite green, but they are one of the most polluting companies. I'm just going to read out a little bit from the press release, if I can. They're leading the global car industry's drive to increase the number of private vehicles sold each year. The global car sales for 2022 are forecast to grow by around 84 million vehicles, equivalent to building 104 new coal-fired power stations. I know we normally measure things in terms of getting numbers of cars off the road, so there's a little bit of an inversion there. And they're just trying to aggressively expand personal car ownership rates globally, spending $1 billion a year on advertising in the US alone. And I think the rest we know. So I just wanted to mention that. That is, hopefully there'll be more to follow.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. Thanks for sharing that with us. Adam, you got a question?
Yeah, just a quick one, not question. I put a link in the chat, which is to how to build your own bamboo car bike, should you ever want to. I did it for a clean air day and got it so you could actually zoom down hills on it. And because the ones they actually show you building, you have to be very level on it, whereas the one I built creates a platform for you. So there's a link in there. It's a lot of fun, very easy to do, and all it takes is bamboo and gaffer tape. So enjoy.
Yeah. Now that sounds like a great school project, and I want to invite on Ali Stansfield, who I know put in the chat that she's just launched the first school street in Newcastle this week, and I'm just going to invite her to say, just tell us how it's gone very briefly, Ali.
Yeah, thank you. I wasn't expecting to say it out loud. Sally, you'll know more than most people, and Mike Cookson as well, that school streets in Newcastle have been a little while coming. But yeah, we launched our first one at Hotspur Primary School yesterday, and it's a bit of an odd project. It's signage only at the moment, so it's not sort of the usual physical barriers that people are used to. I might be dead cheeky, Sally, and very quickly share my screen just for the before and after situation, and you're going to see all the other random stuff I've got up, but hopefully that shows you that it's had quite a positive impact. There are still obviously a lot of cars down there because lots of people live there, and then the one that really got to me was this, which we did with year 5 before the closure, which is Mowbray Street is the street, sort of the main street that's being closed as part of the scheme, and this shows you how the children felt before the restrictions were implemented. So yeah, that's been quite a big change in Newcastle that Sally and others have been campaigning on since I was in school. So thank you very much, Sally, for all your campaigning, but also letting me.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing that with us. And we're looking forward to seeing lots more of them. So I think we'll move on now to our first speaker. Rachel, are you there?
Yes, hello.
Yes, great, fantastic. So we've obviously had Rachel Aldred on here before, talking about research that she's been undertaking at the University of Westminster with colleagues, and she's going to talk to us today. We've asked her specifically if she'd talk to us a little bit about sort of the latest low traffic neighbourhood sort of kind of data that's coming out of their people and places survey. She's going to talk about her people and places survey. So Rachel, I'll just hand over to you.
Okay, thanks, Sally, and thanks for inviting. I'm hoping that people can see my slides. So
yeah,
good, brilliant. Okay, yes, thank you. So yeah, very excited to be able to talk about this here, because as people may know, we've been running this longitudinal survey called People and Places for Transport for London, basically for 6 years, which is pretty unprecedented in terms of longitudinal surveys. You often get 2 or 3 years tops. So the fact that we were able to follow up for 6 years, and we're currently putting together the final academic a big headline final academic paper, and there's a report that Transport for London will hopefully be publishing soon. So I'm just going to say a little bit about the Mini Hollands programme, the People and Places survey, and then give you some of the headline results. But I'm very happy to answer further questions, or indeed about other LTN related research that we've been doing. So the People and Places Survey was not originally designed to look at LTNs because they didn't exist then. It was designed back in 2014 when the Mini Hollands programme was announced. And I was really excited to look at the impact of the Mini Hollands programme, which was 3 outer London boroughs, 100 million for walking and cycling. And, you know, this in active travel terms was really unprecedentedly big money then. And also, I was excited to look at outer London because it wasn't Hackney, it wasn't Camden, it was somewhere where, you know, in London context, these boroughs are really relatively car dependent. And this is just a comparison of mode share in inner London and outer London. So inner London is blue and outer London is orange. And you can see outer London has much higher car share of residents trips at nearly half, whereas in inner London that figure is 20%. So you can see that outer London is much more typical of car dependent areas of the UK. So I thought, well, if these schemes have an impact in outer London, then this will really be quite significant. So I was really keen to look at it. And these were the first 3 Mini Holland boroughs that were announced in 2014. So that, yeah, this is inner London is green, outer London is yellow, and then you can see Enfield, Kingston and Waltham Forest there. And they were quite different as well, which interested me. So Kingston, southwest London, relatively affluent, relatively high levels of walking and cycling for outer London as well. Waltham Forest somewhere in the middle, kind of quite average in terms of levels of walking and cycling, and Enfield had really very low levels of cycling even for outer London, below 0.5%. So they were quite a mix of areas as well, these 3 Mini Holland boroughs. So we designed this People and Places survey, and as I'm saying, it ran from 2016 to 2021, so 6 separate waves, and persuaded Transport for London to fund it across all but one of those waves, in fact. And it's been, it's basically been running every year with the same group of people. So the approach of the survey is to use what's called a natural experiment approach. So this approach is basically treating the Mini Holland interventions, all these different active travel schemes, as a natural experiment that's going in, people are being experimented upon, and you have a control group of people who are not experiencing that experiment. So it's basically an approach sort of taken from medical science, but you know, it's one that you use in a context where you can't randomize. You can't randomly give half of your people a cycle lane and the other half not. So in our case, our control group was people living elsewhere in outer London. And the importance of having the control group is that, for instance, you know, if you have a nice hot summer, you tend to get more walking and cycling. But obviously it wouldn't be fair to attribute that to a scheme because when it's the weather. But if you've got a control group, then you can control the effect of the weather effectively. And this has obviously become really salient in COVID times when it's been quite hard for authorities to demonstrate impacts of schemes because travel behaviour is all over the place. But it's a good thing to do anyway. So initially we were looking at active travel interventions more generally. I will come on to the low traffic neighbourhoods in the results. Later we've looked more at low traffic neighbourhoods specifically. But the idea was to look at these interventions going in across outer London, across this basically 5-year period, and to see whether they did change people's travel behaviour, change people's attitudes and change people's views of the local environment. So we had 3 key research questions. So one was looking specifically at changes in levels of cycling, changes in levels of walking, and changes in levels of car use. Later we added car ownership. Interestingly, initially we didn't think there would be any impact on car ownership, but that proved to be actually, you know, somewhat pessimistic. Secondly, were they associated with a change in the perceptions of local environmental quality? So initially my thought was these schemes might take a while to have an impact on behaviour, but people might initially be like, oh yes, the environment's better for cycling, but they might not start cycling until a year or 2 down the road. And we also asked about attitudes towards different transport modes. And I don't have time to talk about this here, but this is really interesting in terms of looking at, you know, who is favourable to more investment for cycling or whatever, and who is less favourable. But yeah, there's also 5 published papers now in this study, and there'll be more coming. So it was an online survey. It went to the same people every year. The sample was a mix of people who'd got survey leaflets sent randomly to households and people who came from Transport for London's customer database. The really key thing about this was that we didn't just have loads of cyclists. I was really, you know, the sample at baseline had fairly typical travel behaviour of outer Londoners more generally, which is quite important, I think. Although obviously you can adjust, you can wait for those things. So the core of the online survey, and the bit that took people longest to fill in, was a travel diary that they filled in over, you know, they gave us details of their past week's travel. But there are also other questions, as I was saying, on travel behaviour, views of the local environment. We developed a sub-questionnaire that asked people about, how healthy their street was, which was quite interesting. And we also had demographic questions so that we could look at differences by demographics. And as I was saying, the key thing about this method is we're looking at change in the group that gets the intervention, that gets a cycle track built next to them, and then we're comparing that to change among a similar group of people so that we can say, okay, what is the effect of that cycle track compared to what would have happened anyway. So just before I give you some headline results, I just wanted to give you this is quite interesting. So these are the questions that we ask people about in relation to the local environment. So I just wanted to pull out a couple of things at the top and the bottom. So the green things are where people generally thought that those areas were relatively good, and the red are where they felt their local area was relatively bad. So at the top, there are places to walk to, shops, restaurants, leisure facilities. So on average, people agreed with that. That's the sort of average response to that, which is good because it means you've got neighbourhoods that people feel are relatively walkable. People generally thought that walking was relatively safe, but at the bottom in the red you could see that people tended to disagree quite strongly at the bottom, that their local area was safe for an 8-year-old to cycle. People didn't think that, perhaps unsurprisingly, and people generally were relatively likely also to say that cycling is unsafe because of the traffic. So that kind of gave us some baseline perceptions. People thought their areas had stuff to do, which was good, and they thought the walking environment wasn't too bad, but they were quite negative about cycling and also about actually air pollution. Yeah, this just gives you a sense of our survey sample. At baseline, we had about 3,300, 3,400. Half of them were from mini Holland boroughs, half from the rest of Outer London. By the time we got down to wave 5, we were getting down to about 1,400 people, which, generally we were getting just under half of people participating each year. So yeah, the analysis we did year on year, we looked at what was in there, and we tried. And then we compared the people who lived near the new interventions with the people who lived in the rest of Outer London, and that just shows actually in May 2019, halfway through the survey, you can see in red are what we called low dose areas. So these are parts of the mini Holland boroughs where nothing really had happened. So you're in Enfield, but you didn't have anything near you. And then in yellow, we've got what we called high dose areas where things had gone in that might be expected to make a difference to travel behaviour according to local officers. And we've also got routes marked there. So, I mean, people will be quite familiar with this. I'll just skip through quickly and then get through to a couple of results. This is the kind of stuff, Lee Bridge Road, cycle track at the bottom, before and after of part of a Waltham Forest, mini Holland, what we now call a low traffic neighbourhood. Again, example of filtered permeability in Waltham Forest from travel in London 11, and before and after, this is part of a filtered neighbourhood. This is part of a low traffic neighbourhood. So just for the final sort of 3 minutes or so, here are some headline results, and these I think are really quite significant because we're finding the same thing year on year. It's quite in relation to LTNs, and it's quite consistent. So the grey is people who lived in an area that was high dose, generally active travel infrastructure going in, and they lived in a low traffic neighbourhood. The orange is people who live near active travel infrastructure that have gone in, but not within an LTN. And the blue bars are low dose areas. So what you're seeing with those, the lines, the black lines, are 95% confidence intervals. So basically what this is telling us is that every single wave 1 to 5, we're finding a statistically significant increase in walking and cycling in the high dose LTN areas. What we're also generally finding is an increase in areas that weren't in LTN, but that got other active travel infrastructure, although it's weaker and it's not always statistically significant. The blue bars, though, are never statistically significant. So what this is saying is, it's no good living in some bit of Enfield that's getting nothing. You actually have to live near interventions, and ideally in a low traffic neighbourhood, to see more walking and cycling. What we also found consistently across the different waves was that there was an increase in participation in cycling. The proportion of people doing any cycling in the past week, particularly in the low traffic neighbourhood areas, and to a lesser extent where there are other interventions. And again, we didn't see much change in the low dose areas. So for instance, what those grey bars are telling you is that between waves 1 and wave 5, you're generally getting something between 30% and 60% increased likelihood of past week cycling in those areas that have seen the most ambitious interventions. So not just more cycling, but more people participating in cycling. Amount of walking, this is also striking, and most of the increase in active travel was in walking, and this actually surprised me when I first found it, but it was very consistent. So in the high dose LTN areas, particularly to a lesser extent in the other high dose areas with other active travel stuff going in, you're seeing a substantial amount of walking, past week walking reported by people. So between 50 minutes, depending on the wave, and 90 something minutes extra walking the past week. This is a really substantial health economic benefit. We're just calculating this for a paper at the moment. Car use, we're seeing the opposite pattern. So this is percentage with any car use in the past week. And basically for the people in the high dose area that's also got a low traffic neighbourhood, we're seeing generally there's around a 20%, between a 15 and 20% reduction in most of the waves in past week car use. So people in the high dose, low traffic neighbourhood areas are driving less. And there's not so much evidence of that reduction in the high dose non-LTN areas, but there's possibly some reduction as well. So yeah, some of that extra walking cycling seems to be coming from a reduction in car use. The final results slide I just wanted to show you is around change in cycling perceptions. Now, this is interesting. So while the change in walking, cycling and car use are quite localized to the interventions, the more interventions, the more increase in walking, cycling, the more reduction in car use. The cycling perceptions improvements are sort of, they're also happening. I mean, there is a pattern, they are stronger in those areas, but they're also happening in the low dose areas. So people who lived in other parts of the mini Holland boroughs were saying that the environment for cycling had improved, even though their travel behaviour hadn't changed and they weren't seeing anything in their area. So it was like the perceptions of the cycling environment, the changes were more diffuse, they were more spread out, but the actual behaviour change was quite localised to where there were schemes. So just to sum up with the key lessons and then finish. So these were my top takeaways were for travel behaviour, it's actual schemes that make a difference. It wasn't just being in a mini Holland area, it was living near a cycle track or living in an LTN, that kind of stuff. However, there seems to be something of a mismatch between the scheme impacts and the perception. So as I was saying, people in the low dose areas, people perceived a change in the environment, but they didn't change their behaviour. But also people generally perceived a change in the cycling environment, and yet the change in behaviour was mostly in walking. And I think that's interesting, and I still don't totally understand it. Another thing that I haven't had time to talk about was that schemes are controversial. We know this, but there was some evidence that this declined over time. It started early on, even before schemes had gone in. It was quite diffuse again, but there was some evidence it declined over time. And finally, of course, I'm a researcher, so monitoring and evaluation are crucial, but I think in this study, we were able to look at walking, and most studies don't look at walking. And I think that was really important. And hopefully that wasn't too much over time. And I shall just stop there. Thank you. Oh, I'm happy to answer questions in the chat as well afterwards.
Thanks, Rachel. That's really fantastic. Yeah, and again, like just it is amazing to be able to kind of keep going back to it and seeing, what has changed as time's gone on. I can see there's one hand in the chat, but I'll just ask a question first. I wondered whether given that you did start all that time ago, whether there are things that you think, oh, I wish I'd asked that now if you were doing it differently. Is there anything you would change about the survey?
Oh God, loads, obviously, always. Yes. One of the things, so having a bigger sample size, I mean, because we thought that it was going to be focusing on the mini Holland boroughs, that's how we designed our sample, and we ended up, I would have loved to have had more in like the low traffic neighbourhood areas, more. I mean, I would have liked to have the whole of London. In fact, I mean, I would also, it'd be lovely to have objective measurements of travel behaviour and physical activity, but that's really expensive and difficult, and there was no way we were going to be able to do that. I would have liked to have, there were ways I would have liked to improve the sampling. There were things I'd have liked to put in the questionnaire, more specific perceptions of schemes potentially. So yeah, lots of stuff would have liked to change. The frustrating thing about longitudinal survey is you design it once, you can't then keep going and changing it, but there you go. Hopefully it's good enough.
Yeah, and also just sort of shows how much has changed in that time, that you are interested in those things now as well, that That should be hopefully a positive sign. I'll go to Ali first. You got a question?
Yeah, that was amazing. Thank you. I was wondering, when you said that people, even people who hadn't taken up cycling or whatever, had a better perception of like what cycling infrastructure was like around then, did you come up with any reasons for that? Is it literally just that people were still driving around and stuff and just seeing more cycling infrastructure, or?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we're asking in that question, because we a lot of these questions we kick back and forth a lot, and in the end we didn't define your local area. We just sort of asked people in your local area agreeing or disagreeing with these statements. So it's always a little bit hard to know how people specifically define local area. But I mean, yeah, one of the things that was the case was that the mini Holland boroughs were quite famous, and that's we could see that in terms of the controversy early on, that people in those boroughs might well think that things were happening, and might well think that things were happening for cycling specifically without necessarily having happened near to them. So it could be quite a range of things. It could be people have seen it. I mean, people may have just seen stuff in other parts of the borough, quite possibly, I think.
And Adam, you've got your hand up.
Yeah. Hi, Rachel. Yeah, just wanted a quick question about the cycle thing in terms of not seeing those levels of cycling. Is that possibly due to the fact that once you get outside of the boroughs, cycling isn't that friendly, and people still perceive it as a danger outside? So were there some, say, LTNs where they were very much surrounded, say, in a 1 mile or 2 mile radius, where there was more cycling simply because you could use bikes more readily without having that problem of meeting, say, poor cycling infrastructure?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you put it like that, it does seem kind of, I guess, logical in the sense that you got quite a bit more local walking, but you didn't see so much of an impact on cycling. I think there's also, there is also potentially there's the cultural barrier as well of people, for many people, cycling not being in the choice set. So, the actual decision, whereas walking a bit more appears easy, cycling, even if there's a bike in the shed somewhere, doesn't seem so obvious. So it'd be interesting hopefully it might be quite interesting to see the impact of LTNs, say in Oxford, where you've got more of a culture of cycling, and whether the take-up pattern is different there. But yes, and also when we're measuring proximity to infrastructure, we did do an analysis of like proximity to routes and impact on active travel, and we found that doing it that way showed an effect as well. But that's quite a crude measure. I mean, it might be it's you live near a cycle route, but where does it go to? Does it go, like as you say, does it go 500 meters and then stop when it reaches the border with Hackney or something? We don't know.
And I just there's a few questions in the chat, but Shan's asked a few questions, some of that you may have already answered. Maybe you can have a look and pick them up. But one that I think is worth asking you now, which is, did the period include the pandemic? And if yes, did the results in the control zones specifically show any possible impact of lockdowns? How did you sort of untangle, what the disappearance of traffic meant in the lockdowns?
Yes, no, this was interesting because the last 2 years indeed were during COVID, and that was why one of them didn't get TfL funding because of the funding issues, basically. So the last 2 years were pandemic years, and the last 2 years, I didn't have time to go into this in the talk, but the last 2 years included emergency LTNs as well, and we found that the impact of those in the rest of Outer London seemed to be sort of ballpark similar to the impact of the mini Holland LTNs, which was interesting as well, I thought. But basically, we were able to control for COVID because we had a comparator. So COVID changes were affecting everyone. So in a sense, when you do the modelling, when you look at the impact of the survey, you can take that into account, and you can see the extra impact, or the impact of the measures. Although the problem was, of course, that COVID, when you've got travel behaviour going a bit haywire, you get more noise in your survey, so it can make it harder to pick things up. I mean, we have done a bit in our latest report, which hopefully will be public soon, looking at the impact of COVID changes, and we saw what you might expect. We saw that there was a very large drop in public transport use, and there were more modest changes in car use and walking and cycling, which but at the times that we did the survey. But yeah, we were able to control for that. We did find sort of ballpark similar changes in those years as well, including from the emergency LTNs, but there was more noise, and the survey, so we're less confident to say it's exactly that. Not that we are ever actually confident we say it's exactly that, you know, but you know, there is a substantial impact of the schemes, but the exact impact is you know, I'd be nervous to say what the exact impact was.
Yeah, thanks. And then a couple more questions in the chat. Roxanne asked how long you'll continue for, and Wookie's asked, what was the percentage on the graphs of it was between 1 and 1.5% on the cycling change chart and under 1% on the did you drive in the last week chart, I guess, question mark. Don't know if that makes sense.
Yes, sorry, I should have explained that better. I was trying to hurry a bit too much, I think. So basically, when we're talking about the participation, 1 indicates that it's the same as the control. So basically, if it's 1.1, that's like a 10% rise. So for the car use, it was going down to like 0.9, 0.8. So that's basically saying 10 or 20% reduction. And that's in the likelihood of past week car use. So like if everybody used a car in the past week in the control group, then that's saying 80 to 90% did in the intervention group. Obviously, it's not that because it's lower, but yeah, but I'm happy to, or I can attempt a better explanation if need be, but that's basically it's comparing, and 1 would be the same as the control. And the other question was about how long we're going to. So People and Places has finished, which is a bit sad, but you know, I think it was it was basically not going to last more than 5 or 6 years, but we've got another survey that's doing similar across the whole of London. And the really nice thing I think about these kind of prospective cohort studies is that, you know, even if they stop doing any LTNs, you've got basically a cohort of people. You could look at something else, you could look at any kind of intervention, because you've got a group of, you know, in principle you've got a group of people. And that's what happened with People and Places in terms of LTNs. We hadn't initially thought that LTNs would be a key thing to look at, but because we had the cohort and because LTNs were going in, we could look at it. So we are doing similar work across the whole of London, so it's exciting.
Yeah, very exciting. It's just, yeah, and it's just so, I mean, yeah, I'm sure all around the country people are sharing this research with local authorities, I mean, I know that in Newcastle cite a lot your work a lot, and it's really, really helpful to have that, you know, have that kind of evidence base. So thank you very much, Rachel. And I'm now going to introduce Clare. Are you here, Clare? I saw you before. Yes, great. So Clare Rogers is going to talk to us a little bit about building community support for low traffic neighbourhoods. Clare's a Healthy Streets campaigner for the London Cycle Campaign, for those who don't know her. And do you want to see if you can share your screen, Clare? Oh.
Yeah, this is always the $1 million question, isn't it?
Yeah. Yes, fantastic.
Okay, can you see, like, is that, I know it's not going to be full screen, is it?
You're not in SlideShare yet. Yes,
I am now, okay. So, oh good, I can still see people, some of you. Well, thanks for asking me to speak, appreciate that. And as I've already been introduced, I'm Clare, I'm Healthy Streets campaign at London Cycling Campaign. I focus on central London. I've been in that role since 2019, but before that, I was just a enthusiastic volunteer from about 2012, just trying to get community support for schemes locally that reduce traffic domination and enable active travel. And as I mentioned in the chat, I was radicalised by Enfield's Mini Holland. And before that, I was just driving around in my diesel Volkswagen for any and every short journey. So I live in Enfield, I've said, and what we did in 2015 with the local LCC group was start a thing called Better Streets for Enfield. And it was a response to the Mini Holland funding. There was a big backlash to the first cycle lane that was proposed. And the idea was just to broaden the argument from cyclists versus normal people, to traffic dominated streets versus people friendly streets. So we're trying to say it's not just about cycling. And we tried to offer solutions. So we had some asks. This is with the help of Megan Sharkey, who's an LCC trustee. She helps us kind of beef up our asks and our vision and be very clear about those. And we really promoted working as coalitions. So we do work with Living Streets campaigners and clean air campaigners and disability campaigners and so on, to try and build that argument. And since then, lots of other Better Streets groups have been popping up. Most of them are sort of in conjunction with their local London Cycling Campaign groups. I'm sorry, this is such a London-centric talk. Sorry, can't do anything about that. And then we've also seen, I think all over the country, probably numerous just neighbourhood groups that have popped up in support of low traffic neighbourhoods. But having Better Streets for Enfield in place was really helpful when the sort of COVID LTNs began to appear, because it just helped us to help support community groups in their support of LTNs. So I just think this is an interesting time to be having this conversation, because this is just my personal view. I'd be interested to hear what other people think, but it feels like we've reached a tipping point in London. So I don't know if other people would agree with that. Obviously, lots of the the temporary LTNs have now become permanent, and while quite a few LTNs have been removed, I think at least 100 remain. And we've just seen this steady build-up of robust evidence. Thank you to Professor Rachel Aldred and the Actor Travel Academy, because that's been so massively helpful, just to see, you know, evidence upon evidence about safety. Particularly has been a big one for me. The fact that emergency services are not affected, the rise in walk and cycling, and the drop in car ownership, and so on. And the Centre for London report that came out last week, for me, it just, I don't know, it felt like a kind of endorsement from this respectable think tank to say, yes, you know, LTNs are a good thing and they're here to stay. And their criticism seemed to be mainly about engagement, consultation issues, rather than LTNs per se. So it just feels like a hopeful moment in London. And I'm not saying the battle is over, far from it. And obviously lots of boroughs remain to be convinced, and there's going to be, I imagine, a new wave of street fights as new LTNs go in and residents try and support them or rip them out, depending on their inclination. So we all know, I used to tell anyone about the controversy, and it's like deja vu seeing these pictures from Oxfordshire and from Sheffield. You know, this is the battle that we were in London 18 months, 2 years ago. Councillors receiving death threats. I know many councillors personally whose mental health has been affected by this battle. Planters and bollards and cameras vandalised. Hundreds of people on anti-LTN marches. Just on a personal level, neighbourhood WhatsApp groups and next door groups going toxic, and neighbours falling out, friends falling out. And of course, several councils buckling and removing their schemes. So it has been a really difficult time. And I've been asking myself, you know, why has there been so much anger? And this is just my personal theory, but someone said to me in his LTN in a different part of London, he said that the opponents it was an ideological battle. He said it was completely ideological. And I think that's true for a hardcore of opponents, not everyone, obviously. And it's just seen, for some people, they feel very strongly that it's an anti-car ideology that's been forced on them, that their freedom has been taken away, that their rights have been taken away. It feels very personal. And it's not surprising that people have such deep feelings about this, because we have had decades, haven't we, of car as king. And the thing about low traffic neighbourhoods is they turn that priority on its head, which is why I love them so much. And suddenly a 6-year-old scooting to school is king instead of a driver taking a shortcut. So for me, it's been a social revolution. It is a social revolution that we're in the middle of it. It has huge social significance. And for me, I don't know if this is an exaggeration, but it feels like, you know, the war for votes for women. It feels that profound change in society. And like any revolution, it's bloody. And some of the battles that we've seen at a neighbourhood level, I'd say one of them is a psychological battle. You've got people who feel guilty about enjoying their low traffic neighbourhoods because they're being told that poorer children on main roads are now choking on the extra pollution, and here they are enjoying their nice private estate, which has been the narrative. And then the political battle, because the voices against have been so loud and so effective, even though of course they tend to be in the minority, to a councillor, it can feel like they are the majority. It can feel like political suicides to support an LTN. And I really hope that the local elections have kind of set that right, that perception. But I would still say it's a brave councillor who puts in an LTN. So I just want to talk really briefly. I should have put the timer on. I'm going to try and stick to my 10 minutes. but just some lessons that I've seen locally about how residents have supported their LTNs, and some ideas for those of you who might still be in that battle or just beginning. So this is my neighbourhood pro LTN group. This is Fox Lane, which happens to be the best LTN in London, in case anyone was wondering. You're very welcome to come visit it. And initially, I look at this photo and I'm just like, look at all our happy smiling faces. We had no idea. We had no idea what we were about to get ourselves into, because the trial hadn't started yet. We also had no idea what a transformation it was going to be. And when I look at the horrible rat run that I used to try and cycle my daughter on in our tandem, compared to what there is now with children, tiny children riding bikes and scooters and walking to school in high numbers, just the transformation, the word I use to describe it is miraculous. There is no other word. It's just phenomenal. So this is our LTN, and we helped, as Better Streets for Enfield, we initially helped people find each other who were in favour of the 2 LTNs in Enfield, and they formed WhatsApp groups. And so we were kind of on hand in the background to help, but they became communities, supporting one another on WhatsApp mainly. And that mutual support was really important. And in fact, I would say we've all become good friends. It's just been a real morale booster in quite a toxic environment. And we kind of helped each other to find good practice, good things to do. And one of those very much is refusing to argue on social media. We're just not going down rabbit holes with people. And instead using social media as a way to celebrate. This hashtag, I think, that Lambeth Living Streets came up with, I love our LTN, love my LTN. And we putting pictures on of things that we've done, and then holding events in real life. So this was a woman in my neighbourhood who said, well, let's all get our bikes out of our sheds that we haven't ridden for 10 years and go for a little ride, and we'll just be wobbly bikers for a day. And then events for kids, and then someone did a lovely walking map with points of local interest historically. Then people did things for their streets. We had people gathering together to plant stuff in their planters as families. I think in Lambeth, someone built a lovely bench to go on their planters so people could sit and gather there. There were so many lovely ideas to support, to be positive and to celebrate rather than having an argument. And also to prevent us going down rabbit holes, we had frequently answered questions on our website. So we could just say, okay, here's a link. Don't think that point is wrong. Here's a link to the real answer, or to the facts that are evidence-based. And again, Active Travel Academy evidence was so useful to that. We could just link to the research that had been done. Where had I got to? Oh yeah, and I just think this is genius what they're doing in Oxford. So there are the antis doing what they usually do and laying waste to equipment to the tune of tens of thousands of pounds. And the pro LTN people are doing what? They're protecting children from rat running traffic, and they're handing out biscuits. It's just, who is on the right side of the argument here? And another thing we did was just to support these beleaguered councillors. We made sure that people were regularly emailing, trying to send in positive things to the local press to give their side of the argument, because we know that there was so many angry emails coming into the inboxes of our councillors. But I have to say the most effective thing we did, and it was the most time consuming, but it was a game changer, was just knocking on doors. Just taking the time, and it could take an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours per street, but just knocking on doors and talking to people. This is actually, I nicked this flyer from Walton Forest, but we liked it. So we had people, we'd knock on doors, we'd ask people their thoughts about the LTN. If they were just rabidly against it, and obviously had made their minds up, we would just thank them politely and move on. But sometimes we find people who were a bit on the fence or had been misinformed and were open to hearing some evidence-based facts. And mostly we found people saying, oh, are you for the LTN? I like the LTN, but I'm the only person on my street. And they so often thought they were alone, because the silent majority is so quiet and so scared of getting into a horrible argument. And so that someone like that, they might dare to put a poster up in their window. And if they did, then a flurry of other posters would go up as people realised they weren't alone. And my street is a great example of this. It seemed like the most hostile street in the neighbourhood. It had several anti-posters up in the windows. But when we went door to door, just asking people the same question, more than 80% support of the LTN, and they all thought they were the only ones. So the other useful thing about door knocking is that you can say, did you know there's a council consultation? Most people say, no, I had no idea. And you can just remind them, just drive them to that consultation. That helps boost the results. So I'll leave, there's lots of things I've left out because of time, but just wanted to leave you with this, which is Urban Movement and LCC put together reports about engagement and consultation. Highly recommend it, called How to Talk to People About the Future of Their Streets. And they did this cheeky version of the Kubler-Ross change curve. And I think we've seen this in London. I don't know if others agree with me. People have gone through shock, denial, frustration, depression, and they've come round to acceptance and integration. Slowly, so painfully slowly, it feels like we're getting there. And what was a really healing thing to do was the Jubilee street parties. And on my street, we've had such horrible arguments, really personal and toxic. And people came together, both those for those against the LTN, and had a lovely time. And we didn't mention the LTN once, and it was just beautiful. And I think this is the best kind of street war that you can have. So thank you for listening.
Thanks, Claire. That's really like lots to think about there, and lots of really useful advice. We have a new filter down the road here, and it's been made permanent recently. And when we went for a walk past it the other day, there was a guy watching it, and somebody else walking past said, "Oh, you're looking after it, you like it?" And he'd said, "No, not really. Still don't like it, but since we've got it, we might as well look after it." So there you go, even the people who still don't like it or have to come around in some way. And Mark put in the chat that he has to go to another meeting and he has a burning question. Do you want to go first, Mark?
Yeah, thanks. So we've got our first LTN in Brighton. Well, it's not happening yet. It's going to committee on next Thursday to go to consultation. So it's been in consultation for nigh on 2 years. Yet there are still people saying they're not consulted and all the rest of it. But there are very strong, it's a very strongly opinionated area. If anyone knows Hanover, it's the People's Republic of Hanover, has a Facebook page with 10,000 people on it. The population of the area is only 7,000 or 8,000. It's very, very opinionated area. And there are, I think as Wookie just said, there are lots of very opinionated people. So the people who support it don't really want to be seen supporting it because they're going to get shot down in public by a lot of people being very abusive to them. So exactly as you said, but it's very hard to get people out to do that. So we're going for a meeting on one of the boundary roads very soon. I suppose it's just, talking about how you deal with people when you have to meet them in public meetings. You can mute people online and so on, but when it gets to meetings on site, what do you do when somebody starts shouting? Maybe not even shouting. If they're horrible, you can walk away. But when they're, if you like, slightly more politely horrible to you.
You need a really good chair. And I personally wouldn't be up to chairing a meeting like that. And I've been to umpteen meetings that the kind you're describing, and you need a balanced panel and a tough chair, and it's very difficult. And we went to meetings that were badly chaired and had an unbalanced panel, and I know people that didn't sleep for 3 nights after those meetings. Which is why, I know it's not an alternative, but going door to door, people are terrified to go door to door because they think of the horribleness on social media and they think the door's going to open and someone's going to spout at them like they do on Twitter. And the opposite is true. It's so disarming, and you'll be so surprised, and you'll make friends for life. As a canvasser, political canvasser, who's been doing it for 30 odd years, actually, I'm very happy. I'd be very happy to do door to door. Right. More happy than actually meeting in groups, because at least if somebody's horrible, you can just say thank you very much and smile, which is what I do when I meet people on the doorstep. Smile nicely and walk away, which you've got the power to walk away from. In a meeting, you can't. So actually, I'll make that point to one of our candidates. And then one other thing, just what's your experience of when you have people who are supposedly friends, or organisations who are supposedly friends? I won't name the organisation,
but then you have local representatives espousing their own position, but using their position as a representative of a local campaigning group, saying my group is opposed to this, and going to head office or whatever. Is that a good idea? I don't know if that's something for Simon to answer as well.
Oh, that's well. Simon, feel free to follow up. So I'm thinking what you're making me think of instantly is residents' associations. And isn't it the same?
Well, it isn't, but I won't say who it is because it'd be embarrassing for the group.
Okay, I mean, in the case of residents' associations, I mean, what we've found is like one committee or two committee members saying this is the position of all our members. We hate the LTN, and that's just not correct. And so we have people who've left and emailed the chair and said this is why I'm leaving, or trying to make change happen. As to other organisations, we've also had a member of a political party that you would assume would support LTNs, not supporting it in a very devious kind of way. But I don't want to say any more than that. Simon?
Thanks.
I'm happy to just well, I'll shut up because Ruth obviously is...
Ruth. Sorry, Ruth.
Sorry, I had my hand up. Simon always likes to jump in. Well, because I stood all weekend at a cycle hub in Chiswick, and many of you may know that Chiswick C9 had a lot of anti-people. They raised £49,000 to try and take it to a legal challenge, but they've actually lost that money, and now they are all asking the people who got them to raise the money, well, what have you done with it? But the overriding thing was that there was a worry that having this table promoting cycling and people would be very angry. Often couples would come and I'd say, well, do you cycle? And it was often the woman would say, oh, no, my partner, husband, brother, son cycles. I'm not a cyclist. And it's when you try and kind of talk to them about, it's not about being a cyclist. It's just about getting to school by bike or getting shopping by bike or going to see friends by bike. And I always have my bike there, which has got lots of flowers. So that's kind of does help. But the anger was taken away because it was a fun event and there were loads and loads of people who had turned up on bikes, and we had Dr. Bike fixing bikes, and we had a bike to raffle. So those kind of events can also help, especially now we're in the summer and everyone's having fetes. So it's always good to try and get a cycle hub in whatever fete festival or anything that your council are doing.
Thanks, Ruth. I've got a question for you, Claire. I stayed with a friend in southeast London at the weekend who we both used to live actually in what's now the Lee Green low traffic neighbourhood, and she's still travelling back there to take one child to school. And I had a really interesting conversation with her about that low traffic neighbourhood, and she kind of was very unhappy with it, how it had gone in, COVID, lack of consultation. Obviously she's got most of her friends still in that area, and the general feeling that I got was that a lot of people were really unhappy with how it had been handled, and the same things that we hear, boundary roads, it is a particularly sensitive area, but pollution on main roads. And I mean, I completely agree with you about door knocking. That's something that in the past we've done a lot here. It wasn't possible in COVID, that was a really perhaps one of the really tricky things about it. But I wonder, it just made me think, like, this is somebody who is very much aware of, environmental issues, and I just don't think we're always getting through. We're not breaking through in that people are not accepting these measures as kind of valid ways of tackling the problem of traffic. I mean, it's a bit of a big one to ask you, but is there anything, how can we do that? Because I can respond with all of the kind of answers to that, and I just, somehow it's not convincing. It's not a kind of, we've been doing this so long, kind of, running our transport system the way we do, that it's so hard to change how people understand that. I wonder whether you had any advice for how you tackle that really difficult to shift sort of attitudes.
I mean, I think just to address the anger about the consultation issue, it was really a difficult time, because obviously the Department for Transport put huge pressure on London, on all councils to rush things in as emergency LTNs. And there was something like, 2-4 weeks time for people to be alerted and to give their feedback. So that there was a lot of anger around that, and that kind of set the tone, I think, in some places. And I think there's really useful recommendations in the Centre for London report about how to engage well, and how to be honest about this, that there are downsides to an LTN that might impact you. Here they are. Just be very honest about that. But I think also, I mean, I really would urge, and I'm talking as if you're a local authority, but I mean, this is when a local authority engages properly, that does take a lot of the toxicity out of it. And LCC's done this, I think, fantastic report that we don't talk about enough, which is how to talk to people about the future of your streets. And I'll put a link in the chat, because it really goes through from the ground up, you know, how to engage with people and make them part of the process, which obviously you can't do, maybe it wasn't possible during COVID, but from now on it is. And I think, you know, there's good advice as well, just ongoing advice about how local councils should be talking about these schemes. So yeah, I don't know if that helps.
Yeah, thank you. No, that's all really useful. I've got a question from Shane in the chat. What's the most difficult anti-LTN argument to counter when it comes at you?
Well, I'm just one of these guilt-ridden white middle-class women who, you know, I picked up an anti-LTN leaflet, and I've been one of the major advocates of the LTN in my area for all sorts of good reasons. Like, a leaflet came through my door and it talks about the social injustice of pollution on main roads. And I was like, oh gosh, maybe I shouldn't be supporting them. It just, you know, it's that guilt. You feel guilty. So what's the best way to counter it? For me, the best thing, my instant kind of knee-jerk, why do I support the LTN? And it comes partly from Rachel Aldred's work, is it is safer. So, you know, if I wanted to answer in 1 second, why do I support an LTN? It is safer, children can walk and cycle to school, the end. So anything else is surely secondary to that. And about the pollution on main roads, I would just say we need to drive less, and the LTN is enabling people to drive less, and you know, it's one of many measures, but we have to go through this painful period where pollution is worse on main roads. It will improve over time as these other measures go in, as well as LTNs.
Yeah, I think it's like, actually, in that this conversation I've had with a lot of people, but a lot of people are like, well, this sounds great, but unless you could do all these other things on the main road and do everything at the same time, it's not going to work. And obviously that's just not really possible. So yeah, I mean, it's difficult.
You have to start somewhere is a good one line.
Yeah. Mark, you've got your hand up.
Yes, hi, question for Claire. Hi, Claire.
Hi.
Hi. So I was wondering what you think about the idea of rebranding LTNs, calling them something else. That was something that was floated in the Centre for London report, and whether we should call them, you know, quiet neighbourhoods or whatever. Because on the one hand, I think, you know, we don't have anything to apologise for about low traffic neighbourhoods. But on the other hand, it seems that those three little letters, LTN, have just become so toxic that maybe we need to start just giving them a different name.
Yeah, and I can understand where this is coming from. I'm a bit baffled as to how practically that would work, because we need a term, don't we, to understand what a low traffic neighbourhood is. So it's one we've been using. Sorry about my dog. One we've been using from the start. So we kind of need the technical term. And I think each individual council seems to have a different name for LTNs anyway. So in Enfield, they are quieter neighbourhoods. I think in Camden, aren't they safer neighbourhoods, and there's livable neighbourhoods. So I think each council has to sort of come up with its own term, and that's fine. But I don't know how we can get rid of the LTN term, just because then we wouldn't know what we were talking about. But yeah, locally branding can be effective, I'm sure.
I just think a name that actually emphasises the benefit in the title. So safer, quieter, whatever.
So safer is one that I would
useful to us as campaigners than something that just says low traffic.
Yeah. Because and so safer is one thing that I would emphasise, and the other thing is I remember in Waltham Forest, Clyde Lokes called low traffic neighbourhoods part of the active travel toolkit, And that what that emphasises is you're providing a whole network for walking and cycling, and that's got nothing to do with whether you live there or not. That's providing something to the borough for anyone passing through. So I don't know how that translates into a name, but I like that emphasis.
Thanks, Mark. We've got another question in the chat that I can see. Do we have anything that shows whether main roads in fact have a higher proportion of low-income families?
Is Rachel still here?
Yeah, I don't know.
Isn't, sorry, I wasn't muted and I was typing away. Isn't it the case that property alongside main roads and railways is always cheaper per square metre, acre, whatever, and that's where sheltered housing and social housing is often built?
I think it's probably more complicated than that. Rachel is here. Rachel, do you
I've just got to head off, but I have put a couple of links in the chat. We've kind of looked at this question in a couple of ways. The data, you know, I mean, there's data limitations, but those 2 links might hopefully help. They're pretty similar, the demographic in London anyway, the demographics of people who live on main roads, high streets and other types of streets. But the links are there.
Thanks. And yeah, I mean, and obviously it's going to vary very much outside of London as well. Do we have any more questions for Claire? No, I haven't spotted any more. Oh, Shane, you have one.
Yeah, just one of the arguments that comes up is not just about pollution. People argue that because there's more traffic on main roads, then there must be more injuries on main roads as a result of LTNs. And I would argue that until Rachel or someone gives us the data, I would argue that the models suggest otherwise, that because most collisions happen at junctions, if you're using LTNs, you're reducing the amount of cars turning at every side road, which should make it easier to walk along the main road. So I just wanted to throw that one out there, that it's not just pollution. People also argue that the main roads will become inherently more dangerous. And I would dispute that depending on how you're using the main road. So I just thought
I'm pretty sure Rachel has covered that, like everything else, and found that the LTNs at least didn't lead to an increase in collisions on main roads.
Yeah, and many of the filters that went in actually in the 60s and 70s were partly because of collisions, like as you say, that were happening at junctions on main roads. Because that is one of them. I think that is one of the places that you're most likely to be hit, crossing a side road junction on a main road. So yeah, it would be interesting, wouldn't it, to get some more data on that. Any other questions? We're done. Thank you so much, Claire. That was really great. Lots of things to follow up and think about. I have to say, I'm not sure who we've got next week. Does anybody else know? Bob, do you know who we've got next week? Before I hand over to Ruth to do the last word. I don't know.
We have Joe Rigby, councillor from Wandsworth.
Is that next week?
Yes.
Fantastic. Thank you.
We'll tweet about who's on actually shortly before the time.
Yeah, so look out for that. And I'm going to hand over to Ruth now for the last word. It's great to see you.
Thank you, everybody. Claire didn't mention the builder's breakfast that she did, which we copied on Cycleway 9, which was very successful, sort of providing breakfast to the builders who'd been building it and got quite a lot of promotion from that.
That's because you did it better than we did, so Ruth, I don't want to draw attention to it.
No chance, you did it beautifully. I still think one of the things that, certainly from TfL, I don't know about the rest of the country, Wales, I was on a fantastic webinar yesterday that was what can the Welsh teach the English sort of thing, and the way they seem to be going about it is phenomenal. And I was cycling in Wales 3 weeks ago, and certainly driver behaviour, infrastructure and all the rest of it were infinitely better than they are in rural roads here. But for us, TfL, they came and did kind of a 3-day face-to-face consultations in far too small a room. They didn't have enough time. They didn't really have enough information. They then leave, and they leave those of us on the ground to hold the fort. And I'm sure that's what happens around the country. And I just think if government really want to do this on Active Travel England, they need proper road shows and really well-run road shows that aren't always those of us who are converted already, but that the people who are going to be angry or not agree can come along and have a really decent roadshow to learn the benefits of walking, wheeling and cycling. That's my feeling. And that is my last word. Bye.